Link, and there we go. Well, Doctor, welcome to the Edge Television broadcast. I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Well, I'm so glad that you have me on. Thanks, Daniel.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, Doctor, we're going to be talking about your book, Already Here, A Doctor Discovers the Truth About Heaven. But before we do, Doctor, why don't you introduce yourself to the Edge Television broadcast, who you are and what you're about.
Okay. Well, my name's Dr. Leo Galland. I'm an internist in New York City. I'm an author, published a few books. I'm also an educator and a researcher and a scientist. And I've taught thousands of docs over the years.
Wow. You taught?
I've taught thousands of docs, directly and indirectly, through lectures, through the Foundation for Integrated Medicine, and the Institute for Functional Medicine, and other organizations like that.
Wow. And in those teaching sessions, seminars, is it just all sorts of topics, or is it health related, or what type of?
It's all health related.
Okay.
That is, everything that I've done over the past 45 years has been related to health and illness. And I've really had a strong focus on the role of nutrition, the role of what's called the microbiome today on health. That's my background. Already Here is unlike anything I've ever written or presented publicly. It's totally different.
Well, I guess you, as a basis as being a doctor and educated, I mean, it seems to be far away from the science of medicine. I guess one would say it sounds like there was a time when you had a defining moment in your life that from the scientific methodology of medicine, you moved into another sort of realm. Tell us about that. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, the defining moment for me came a number of years ago, but the process was a slow one that unfolded over some period of time. And that moment was the death of one of my sons, Christopher, who died at the age of 22. And there were two extraordinary events surrounding Christopher's death that totally changed my understanding of the universe. Chris was a brain damaged special needs child who was very challenging to everybody and very challenged himself. He had gone to stay in a therapeutic community in the Berkshire Mountains, which is about 150 miles away from New York City, where my wife and I live. And he had been there for 9 months when, in one cold November morning, he went out for a walk with some friends in the community and drowned. He probably had a seizure, drowned in about 2 inches of water. He was being resuscitated at a local emergency room in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And my wife and I were sitting by the phone in New York waiting for word. That's a terrible feeling, that the feeling of powerlessness, the immobilization, it's awful. I would wish that for nobody. All of a sudden, it felt as if lightning were about to strike. The room was supercharged with a kind of high voltage electricity. And my wife, Christina, and I had exactly the same experience. We saw a bright white light that was really intense. And the origin of that light was Christopher. We could see him, we could see his face, although it was perfect. His body was not so well defined. And what was most remarkable about this vision that we both had, aside from the fact that we saw the exact same thing at the same time, was the incredible power and joy and freedom that radiated out from Christopher's being. He was with us for a few seconds, then he was gone, the phone was ringing, and of course we knew what we'd hear. The emergency room doc was on the other line saying, we've tried, we can't bring him back. And of course we knew that. And we thanked him for his efforts. Now, if that were the only experience, I think I would have remembered it. I would have done what I did at the time, which was to constantly return to what that moment was like and the incredible happiness that Chris seemed to have. Um, it was kind of like a release. It was amazing. But that wasn't the only event. We buried Chris in the Berkshire Mountains near the community that had been so important to him. And at his graveside, we released 22 yellow balloons, one for each year of his life.
Okay.
Now, the balloons were connected to yellow ribbons, and they were all tied to a sandbag, so I had to cut them loose.
Okay.
And so there was about 12 inches of yellow ribbon attached to each balloon. The next day, we returned to New York City. As we were driving into Columbus Circle, a place that had a certain significance for Christopher because it was named after another Christopher, Cristoforo Colombo. And I would sometimes call Christopher Cristoforo, and he would laugh because it made his name sound so strange. We stopped at a red light. A yellow balloon descended from the sky. It was attached to about a 12-inch yellow ribbon. It hovered right in front of our car, and then it kind of drifted and bobbed away. We were dumbfounded by this. There were 5 people in the car. We all saw it. And unlike the vision, which one could say, well, maybe that was, this was a moment of emotional intensity, maybe it was a hallucination, although by definition, a hallucination is seen by one person, not 2 at the same time. But this was something that was material, it was real, and it very difficult to explain away. Sure, you could dismiss it as a coincidence, but the odds that that would happen, that a balloon that we had released at Chris's grave would find us 24 hours later at Columbus Circle, I mean, the odds against that are astronomical.
How far away is that?
150 miles. So basically, this balloon traveled 150 miles from the place we released it and found us 150 miles away at the moment we passed through Columbus Circle. We were just driving through it on our way home. Now, my first thought actually was, wow, isn't that a coincidence? A child must have lost this in Central Park, which was just a block away. But the fact is, this was a cold day in November. There weren't children getting balloons in Central Park. This balloon wasn't rising up with a long yellow ribbon, which is what you'd expect. This balloon was dropping down. It was about a day old. It looked somewhat spent, and it had this short 12-inch yellow ribbon with a kind of a ragged edge from my cutting it. So it would be hard to argue that this was not one of those balloons. And then if you're really a scientist, and if you're really committed to science, you have to try and explain that phenomenon. Mm-hmm. You can't just dismiss it as a coincidence. And that was what sent me on this journey. Those were the steps that initiated this journey for me.
Wow. Well, that certainly does seem like what I would say a little further ahead of coincidence would be what I would call a synchronicity. Synchronicity seems to be an order. There seems to be an order to something more than, say, chaos. So obviously, and chaos would say that events happen randomly without reason, and just like throwing up a deck of cards and coming down, they'll scatter to different places. But if you throw up that same deck of cards and do that twice, then that's a synchronicity. That is a controlled event. And so, yeah, that would certainly, if that happened to me, my spiritual spidey sense would be completely activated. My antennas would be up. I would be looking to see what is going on, and I'd also be looking to be aware if there are any further events. When that happened, were you more perceptive, and those in the car were they sort of acclimated to that? Were they adjusting to what else could happen?
Well, there were of the 5 people in the car, 3 were kids. The kids had a really interesting reaction. They weren't exactly impressed by it. It was like, of course, that was one of the balloons we released in Great Barrington. Of course, Christopher sent it. What could be more natural than that? My wife and I were like dumbfounded. But to the kids, this was, yeah, of course, just a natural event. Now, after that, I certainly I I think the first impact of it was that I had to accept the immortality of Christopher's spirit, and also that the spirit that I saw was such a powerful angelic being. And it was kind of like, yeah, I always knew Chris was a really special kid, but how did I fail to see that in Christopher? And is that something that is present in each of us? Well, years later, when I was starting to write this book, and had one of my several conversations with Christopher, he said to me that he was just like everybody else. So I would say the answer to that is yes. There is a being like that within each of us. And so my fear of death certainly disappeared. The grief that I felt, that we all felt at the loss of Chris, somehow didn't seem diminished. We weren't celebrating this the way that his spirit seemed to. We really missed him, and we were really sad. And it was a very confusing kind of emotional state to have experienced the joy of his liberated spirit and yet be grieving so strongly for over his death. Now, there were other events that happened, and the next one occurred about 3 weeks later. It was Thanksgiving, one of Chris's favorite holidays. And we had a small dinner, certainly didn't feel like celebrating. And I was overcome by a really mysterious illness. I felt as if I was getting the flu. I was dizzy, fatigued. I had to lie down. The whole illness lasted for 6 hours, and it was definitely not the flu. But I was immobilized, and I began to feel as if Christopher were taking over my brain, and I was reliving all the disappointments and frustrations of his very difficult life because of his brain damage and the kind of behavioral problems that he had that came out of that brain damage. And I was able to understand in a way I had never clearly seen while he was alive the strength of his character and the way in which he changed a pain and disappointment into love and joy. And I began to understand that, wow, it was really something amazing about Christopher, more than I had ever realized. Now, after that, nothing happened for several years. I returned to my work, and I was very busy, and I was teaching, and I was traveling to meetings. And my wife, Christina, would from time to time say, oh, I feel Christopher's presence. I never felt that, although I would try to enter into that moment with her. Then about 5 years later, I was awakened during the night by a voice which I took to be Christopher's saying, you have to tell my story. People need to know. And so I thought, yeah, I really should do that. I have to describe what Christopher was like and his death and the visit of his spirit in the yellow balloon. And so I set about to write this book, already, which became Already Here. And during the course of my writing, over a period of about a year, I engaged in some internal conversations with Christopher and with his, or with Christopher's spirit. And each of them was very different, and they happened in different ways. Usually I would kind of throw out a question because I was always alone, but the place didn't matter. One occasion I was hiking in the desert, or I was walking my dog along the beach, or I was just in my kitchen cleaning up actually after dinner. And I would be thinking about something I wanted to say in the book. I'd write, and so I'd throw out a question to Christopher, and he would answer. Or let's say a voice would answer within my head. I didn't hear it with my ears. I heard it with my brain. I recognized that this was not my own voice, and was very authoritative. I kind of came to call it the voice of truth. And the answers that I got were so much more than what I had expected or what I had asked. And so then I would write those down, and I would try to incorporate them and understand them into this book already here.
Mm-hmm.
What he taught me was quite amazing, actually, although I came to recognize that actually Christopher hadn't invented what he was telling me, that he was channeling, in a way, ancient wisdom that was held sacred in many traditions, and he was presenting it to me in a way that I could grasp and understand and find important. And so I wanted to communicate those ideas to other people. I recognized, and I didn't do this book as an expert, the way I'd done my health books. Basically did it as a scribe who was trying to write down and communicate the revelations of a being that I recognized as being far more advanced than I am spiritually. Mm-hmm. And this is the real paradox. In life, this being was my brain damaged special needs son who was totally dependent upon me and others. But after death, I came to realize that he was really a spiritual guide and teacher. And that actually illustrates one of the fundamental themes of Already Here, which is one of the themes of Christopher's teaching to me. I call it the gift of the opposite. And it is a recognition that all things contain their opposites at all times, and that the unity of opposites is actually the fundamental organizing principle of our universe. And then I came to recognize that actually Christopher had always lived this gift in a way that most people didn't recognize. You had to really sit with Christopher and be fully present, which is the second gift that I'll get to in a minute. But Chris was in life, he was always looking for the opposite. And whatever was going on, Chris was looking for the opposite in ways that could be funny or maddening or really full of insight. And probably the most profound way in which he did that was in the way he treated other people and what he elicited from other people. Because of his brain damage, he was exposed to many people who were far more impaired than he was. People who are nonverbal, barely noticing the presence of others around them, drooling, rocking back and forth, unable to walk. Chris would treat each of these people as if this was an important human being, and he would, with no impairment, he would call them by name, he would shake their hand. He didn't make a big deal out of it. This was just the way he was. He was just treated them with respect and dignity. Whereas most of the people that dealt with them were actually just providing custodial care. Mm-hmm. If you thought you were a loser, Christopher could get you to take care of him in such a way that you would feel like a really competent, effective human being. And if you were somebody who thought you were important or very mature or an authority or just smart and rational, Chris could drive you out of your mind. He could get you to really come face to face with your dark side. He could shatter your rationality, and he could show you that whatever you thought of yourself, the opposite was also true. And in that way, he was really educating everyone around him. He was a teacher even in life, and he was teaching the gift of the opposite. Mm-hmm. But in order to really see that, you had to be fully present with Chris. And that was the second gift. Chris explained it to me in the dialogues, but I was able to really see it in his life when I reflected back on the way he was. Mm-hmm. Chris had two ways of doing things. Either he wouldn't do them if he didn't want to, but if he did, he would do them 100%, and nothing would distract him from it.
Let me ask you
Sure.
something, Dr. Gallen here. In the movie Apocalypse Now, did you ever see that movie?
Yeah, sure. I've
All
seen it
right.
a few times.
Okay. All right.
Not recently, though.
Oh, neither have I. But yeah. But anyway, they're going into the jungle to get Colonel Kurtz, had obviously gone insane, according to the commander at the base. But at one point he said, "In every man, there's a battle between good and evil, and good does not always win." Is that a representative or a possibility of when you say there's a gift of the opposite?
Oh, sure, sure. I mean, good. I mean, basically, yeah, good and evil is one set of opposites that is within each of us. I actually love the expression which I'd seen, or the little bit that I'd seen in another movie, and I don't remember which one, that basically there are two wolves fighting within us. One is a wolf of anger and selfishness and greed, and the other is a wolf of love and compassion. And so the question is, which wolf wins?
Well,
It's the wolf,
I got
the wolf that you feed.
I got to stop you right there because while you were talking, I was thinking that very thing, but I couldn't come up with the movie. So I was, and then I got the Colonel Kirkland, but I was thinking that very one about the wolves fighting.
Yeah, right.
If somebody out there watching the program knows that quote or knows where that quote came from, give us a right in, because we have viewers and listeners to the program. Maybe they'll let us know. But I was thinking at that very second that very thing that would be considered a synchronicity.
Yeah, right, right. That's a good word for it. I like that, a synchronicity.
Let me ask you before
Yeah,
this,
go
and
ahead.
I'll let you get back. I don't mean to interrupt you, but just a little bit. Did you consider yourself a religious person before Chris's death?
Not really. That is,
do you consider
I was always a skeptic,
Okay.
and I always considered myself somebody who challenged everything, and wanted things to be rational. Actually, Chris provided me with an ability with a kind of rational understanding for the irrationality of the universe, and that's one of the things that I learned from him. It's not the main thing I wanted to communicate in already here, because the methods, his methods, are what I wanted to communicate, because I think they really lead to a higher spiritual understanding. And whether your higher spiritual understanding leads you to the same place that Chris led me, I don't think is what's important. But that's a long answer to a short question. No, I did not consider myself a religious person.
And I think I don't know if people intermix religious with spiritual. I like the word spiritual myself. Religious seems to be a part of the culture. You know, they haven't really said spiritual. It's not really got into the lexicon. It's always you're religious or not. If you believe there's an afterlife, you're religious. You know, but I prefer spiritual. I just think that's an integral part of our human existence, really. And I think if we don't engage it in some way in our lives, then we're just really missing out on a gift that we have that's a part of us. But so after this, then would you consider yourself a more spiritual person?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my view of spirituality before was it was a kind of what I call a secular view of spirituality. That is, I viewed life as a journey. Each of us has a journey, and so we kind of define who we are by the way we follow that journey. Mm-hmm. And that was the way that I viewed spirituality. I believed and continue to believe that the connection that we have to the world in which we live and other people is very important. What Chris showed me was that connectivity is not just something human. It is basically the reason that the world exists. And this is something that came about in one of our later conversations, in which he basically explained, he had previously explained to me about he had talked to me about the illusory nature of space and time and the importance of being fully present in what he described as God's moment. And he had said to me that God is love, and by that he didn't mean that God loves, that God is not a separate being that loves us, but that love is God and God is love. And that is the force creating the universe.
Mm-hmm.
He went on to explain to me that the reason the universe exists, that is, there is a reason, there is a purpose, and there's a reason we're here. And the universe exists because for love to to express itself, there has to be separation. And so if you talk about a synchronicity, the synchronicity that underlies love is separation versus connection. It is, there has to be separation for there to be connection, and the connection is love. Mm-hmm. And it is a cherishing of the otherness of every other being because of the uniqueness of every being.
Doctor, we had a few responses to my question. One of them coming out of our live chat. It says, this from Flatfoot, said, quote, two natures beat within my breast. One is evil, one is blessed. The new I love, the old I hate, but the one I feed will dominate. And of course, yeah, whichever side we feed will dominate. And we have this from our moderator, Jade. She says the story of two wolves is a popular 21st century legend of unknown origin attributed to Native Americans, possibly the Lenape or Cherokee Indians. And it goes to the which one you will feed. And then the third response we got from that was that may have been referenced in the 2015 movie Tomorrowland. So those were our responses for that question about the two.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. So you say God that it came to you that God is love. Let's get back to that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, in one of the conversations I had with Christopher, he one of my friends had been killed by a taxi cab, a speeding cab, and I was very distressed. And so I took my distress to Christopher. It was about 6 years after Christopher died. And I said, you helped me understand your death, but I don't understand Peter's death. Was this just like part of a plan, or was this just some freak accident? And Chris's response was that I still didn't understand the nature of time as he had tried to explain it to me, that the idea of before and after or a plan really still leaves me trapped by the illusion of time, and that there is only one moment, which is God's moment. Philosophers have called this the eternal present, which is outside of time. And I argued with him about that because I didn't think that was enough to be like fully present in your life. Didn't necessarily connect you to the infinite or to divinity. And I said, because I know of people that have been fully present and they were committing evil acts. They were like fooled into acts of evilness. So Christopher said that the answer to my problem was really very simple, and it was obvious in my own feeling that God has values. And then he talked about how God is love, and that it's not that God loves, it is that God is love. And the love that connects us is the divine force creating the universe. Now, subsequently, I had a conversation with him, and it was one that led to the title of the book, Already Here, in which I asked him. It started out with a very casual kind of question. I asked him, well, what's it like in heaven, Chris? And his answer was full of joy. He said, it's what I always wanted. Everyone is here. Everyone, even you. And actually, when I think about the way Chris was in life, he just loved to be with other people. That is what he always wanted. And here in heaven, freed from the physical body that he'd had to live with, yeah, he was with everyone all the time, and that would be a great source of joy to Chris. But I decided to challenge him. I said, well, Well, what about the evil ones, Chris? What about Adolf Hitler? I mean, where are they? And so he went into an explanation of the origin of evil, that evil originates in consciousness, and it basically is a hatred of otherness. But as part of that conversation, he explained the reason that the earth, that the world exists, that the universe exists, that for love has to be given freely, and that's in its very nature, and that it has to exist between separate beings. So the universe, the material world, is well suited to creating otherness, to creating separation, and that separation is necessary for the connectivity of love. And so then when actually he went into a discussion about evil, and he said there are those beings who perversely subvert the reason for their existence by hating others, and hating them for their otherness, that is a crime against God. The only crime against God that's really possible, was what he said. Wow. And he did not condemn them, he pitied them, because they are in eternal torment because of the schism in their soul that no love can heal. And then he said, well, I can't say that diminishes our joy, because that's the way it always was, and that's the way it always will be. And that actually left me a little depressed. So, because I'm the kind of person that's always trying to perfect everything. Like, I want to make it better. I want to see, I believe in progress. I want to see the universe change. I want to see the world change. I want to see people change. So having him say that left me feeling kind of down. And I was sitting, brooding in my study about it. And then he very gently said, recognizing that, I said, so the universe will never be perfect. And he said, not the way you want it to be, Leo. And then he said to me, you know how you like to tell stories about all the crazy, quirky things I did when I was alive? And already here is full of those stories. He said, well, around here, some of us like to tell stories about you. The way you were always trying, you were so serious, and you were always trying to get everything just right. Lighten up. You're already here. And I mean, that just had me laughing, because he had kind of pegged me. And yeah, I needed to lighten up. And the understanding that I was already there with him, that really allowed me in a very visceral way to understand God's moment and the nature of timelessness, which is the third gift.
Okay.
That Chris
you said earlier that time is an illusion.
Right. Well, he said that basically the biggest problems that humans have are that we have these illusions about space and time, that in fact, that we're really preoccupied with time. He didn't say that time doesn't exist, just that it only applies to a very small segment of reality. And actually, I read a paper in Scientific American about the application of quantum physics to astrophysics. And the writer, who is an astrophysicist, basically said the same thing. Yeah, there's a small segment of reality in which time applies. For most of it, time really doesn't apply. Einstein basically said the same thing when he said, the past, present, and future are illusions. All physicists really know this. So Chris was basically telling me the same thing. There is a small segment of reality that is defined by time. When I call it it's called the arrow of time. So when you're attached to the arrow of time, it's very hard to free yourself from that understanding, because it just dominates everything.
I call that my alarm clock.
Tell me about that. Yeah.
Let me ask you something. You said that he referred to you as Leo in the spiritual guidebook, as some people call the Bible. It says that in heaven, people are neither married nor given in marriage. Is it? You think that might be the reason he called you Leo instead of Dad?
Well, I mean, basically, yeah, I think that may be the reason.
Because we
Um,
become the people. We are independent, autonomous beings, the created by God individually, and our experience on Earth, whether it's marriage or not marriage or however it is, we end up here. It's completely different how we end up there as eternal spiritual beings.
that makes sense. He didn't really get into that. I mean, there were a lot of questions that I didn't ask him,
However,
and
I think the book does say that we would recognize and I've had other people on this show say that we will recognize people on the other side, but I think the people that we know on the earth existence are there for a reason, for interaction and to work with each other somehow or interact with each other's lives to make all life better.
yeah, right. I would absolutely agree with that. I don't think that um, that the group that you belong to when you're on the earth is necessarily the group that you're going to be part of, or that you are part of in heaven. Because you see, it's not as if heaven is something that occurs after life. Heaven is now. That is, when you're living in God's moment, there is no before and after. There is heaven. This conversation that we're having in that space, which is dominated by the arrow of time, and but in fact, um, at this very moment, there is another state of being, and we have the ability to be there if we can unpin ourselves from the arrow of time. I think what I learned, take away from Christopher, and again, I'm not the expert here. I mean, I'm a doctor who is an expert at treating patients, and I'm trying to learn this from my son. But I would say that there seem to be two ways to enter into God's moment. One is to be fully present and kind of unpin yourself from the arrow of time, and the other is to really to immerse yourself in love for others. And Christopher was talking about love in the sense of compassion, and empathy, and through acts of love and compassion, we enter into that, into God's moment, and we are part of eternity.
Okay. When he said that you're already here, does that mean that you exist in two different places at the same time?
In essence, yes. Um, Although it may not be, see, heaven isn't exactly a place, it's a state of being. And so there is a state of being that we all are part of. And it is a place, I mean, from the vision that I have of Christopher's spirit, it is a place of magnificence, of power that is not diminished by anything material, of joy and bliss. I mean, what I saw in Christopher's spirit at the moment of his death, that little glimpse he gave me into paradise, there isn't anything like that I've ever experienced before or after in life. It was the kind of thing that, like, wow, that's where I want to be. Mm-hmm. That's where I want to stay. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just overwhelming. That exists for all of us at any moment that we are able to enter into it. And probably the most reliable way to enter into it, the truest, is through loving the uniqueness of others and and entering into that love, which is God's love.
Yeah, and one thing about God's love is I note that He loves without judgment.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
and I guess some people say some of that example is of dogs. You can hit a dog and he'll ask you, why did you do that? I still love you. That kind of,
Yeah,
that. So
dogs are definitely
so
our teachers.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so yeah. I mean, if it's based on merit, I think we'd all be doomed, Doctor. Hey, we've got a
Yep.
few quick questions for you before we go to break here in about 5 minutes. See if we can run through them real quick. Azure from the YouTube chat. We have a couple of chats going on. Said, "Do you believe in a resurrection?"
Um, I don't really know how to answer that because, the whole concept of of resurrection is one that is dependent on time. That is I think, as I said, I'm not the expert, but it seems to me that if you have death and resurrection, that's a time dependent process. And so, do I believe in the teachings of Jesus? Yeah, I think that so much of what I learned from Christopher is absolutely consistent with the teachings of Jesus, especially as they're described in the Bible, in the New Testament, and especially in Matthew's Gospel. I think that there's a fountain of wisdom there.
Okay. Next question. Uh, well, I'm not sure how to ask it, but it says, "Have you ever used a Ouija board?"
When I was a kid,
Okay. All right.
maybe when I was like 15 or something.
I seen one. That scared the crap out of me, so I'll never be using it. Another person says, "Are you Jewish?"
I was originally.
Oh, what are you now?
I was born that way. I was
Okay.
baptized.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. There's a song title "Born That Way." I don't think it's going that. I don't think it's talking about Jewish either. All right, here's another one. It says, "How many dimensions do you believe we live in at the same time?" I mean,
Wow. Okay. Um, uh, I'm not sure, honestly. The first of all, the four dimensions in which we seem to live, the three spatial and the fourth being time. Um, I mean, those are there. They're part of our material existence. In order to explain the universe, physicists have to come up with 10 dimensions, because they can't do it with four. They can't explain all the observed phenomena with four. So I'm not sure how many dimensions there are.
okay.
And
Okay. All
yeah.
right. All right. Let's go to another question. A lot of people want to know the answer to this question. Did your son mention anything about animals in paradise?
He actually didn't. But I mean, I it's impossible for me to believe that our dogs aren't there.
All right.
It's I mean, that's unthinkable.
How about our baby birds? You think they'll be in there too? Up there
Sure.
too?
Yeah, I think we're see, I what he did tell me is that what God's love is, a cherishing of the infinite variety of beings that are created in this physical universe. And that the reason the universe is here is for this infinite variety of unique beings that are cherished for their uniqueness and for their otherness. So, yeah, that would have to include all the animals and the plants. And I don't think that there's a limit to that. What is special about humans, according to what Christopher told me, is that human consciousness is able to comprehend otherness in a way that most animals aren't, for example. I mean, our dog has one set of relationships for people in the family and another attitude towards everybody else who's not in the family.
Okay. Sounds like he needs to get a little bit of this going on too. Hey, listen, we're right about the top of the hour. Doctor, you want to talk about your website and your book, about how people can get it?
Well, Already Here is available in all the usual channels: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, independent bookstores. I have a website, drgalland.com. That's drgalland.com. And if you go there and you go to books, it comes up at the top of the list, and you can click on there, and it'll take you to any of the different venues that are selling already here.
Okay. All right, Doctor, we're going to take you out of the picture, turn your audio down. Just you can take a break yourself. We'll ring you back here about 9:06.
Great.
All right, here we go. All right, everybody, you're watching and/or listening to the Edge television broadcast. On our Newsmaker line tonight is, of course, Dr. Leo Galland, and we'll be back with him after a 5-minute break. We'll be right back. A YouTube subscriber. Now let's go back to our Skype line and bring Dr. Leo Galland back on the program. Doctor, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back here.
All right. Well, we had a very interesting conversation in the first hour, and one of the things that I was interested in, as you began to tell this story in the room where the light was. A lot of people say that there's light involved with the passing of a relative, or there maybe even a visitation or a tunnel of some sort. Have you experienced anything like that since?
No, I haven't. I haven't had encounters with anyone else's spirit except for Christopher's.
Okay. And I know that that a lot of people say I think we had a doctor on this program that documented near-death experiences and actual death experiences, and he said that there is many documented cases of the person who's getting ready to pass as seeing relatives in the room, or beings that are there to help them into the next place. So, as a doctor, have you ever been in a like a hospice or somewhere where somebody else has died or anything?
Well,
like that?
sure. Early in my career, especially, I had a lot of patients who died. I trained at Bellevue Hospital, the sickest of the sick, I can't say I ever had any kind of experience like that. Mm-hmm. Of course, you're so focused on trying to save the body at those moments. But it's not as if I'm not somebody who has visions and kind of intuitions and feelings of, that, there's something going on here. Mm-hmm. That's just not, part of my experience.
Another thing you mentioned was that you said something about freedom or feeling free or being set free. I know that there's a book that you get if you have a loved one that is in hospice that they give you. It's a short book explaining what it is and the sort of steps that happens. And one of those is that the dying person may tear at their clothes to get their clothes off as a restriction because they want to be free, so to speak. I saw that representative of the shackles of the earthly organic experience as our bodies being part of this plane, as the spirit wants to move, maybe say into the spiritual plane where there appears to be this feeling of freedom. It's like they want to throw off the old and get into the new. And when you said that, that's what I thought. That's what reminded me of this plane of existence has a lot of restrictions to it, and we carry a lot of weight. But on the other side, we appear to have this freedom. Now, what is it that people or spirits do on the other side? Did Chris say?
As far as I can tell, there's this powerful love and bliss that they share just at being. It's kind of like a celebration of beingness. That's about the closest that I can come to an understanding of that. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I thought about in terms of the appearance of Chris's spirit, we could see his face, but there was not really a well-defined body. That is, there were not a neck or arms or legs, and it was kind of like an oblong shape that was rising up, and there was this sense of upward movement and power. It was like a rocket was taking off. It was now that kind of shape is associated with ghosts and the soul. Rudolf Steiner calls that shape the astral body, which is the soul body. And I thought back to the concept of, when people die, they use the expression giving up the ghost.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, that's what we saw, but it wasn't a ghost in the way that we now think about ghosts. I mean, this was a ghost that was like an angel. And, the expression, the Holy Ghost, that's the kind of, that was the kind of experience that this was just an angelic, supernatural experience. This was not some kind of sad ghost experience.
When the spiritual guidebook depicted a story of Jesus appearing to the disciples, he appeared to walk through a wall, and many of them thought that he was a ghost. And I think he said to Thomas, "See that I'm not a ghost." So obviously, the specter of, using tongue in cheek there, I guess, but of ghost being in human lore has existed as long as mankind has been on the planet. That there does appear to be a spiritual plane that sometimes intersects. And as many people, Doctor, I've been doing this show since 2004, and I don't know how many guests. It's untold number of guests I've talked to in all different strata, and I get a lot of different opinions, but they all the ones that come to like a conclusion to life's experiences. It comes down to love. I mean, many of them say it comes down to love. Love is the existence of everything. And I think God said that this says that God is love. And so when I had a guest on the program said that they went to heaven, and I asked them, did they see God? And they said they didn't. If God is love, I mean, that doesn't depict a sort of a being. It sort of depicts something else.
Right. That's basically what Christopher was communicating to me, a way of thinking about God, not as a being separate from love, not as some separate being creating the universe, but as as divine love, which is the force that creates the universe and creates each of us. And so I would agree with that description. That seems to fit with what Chris said to me. And I think this kind of everyone, all of us who are having these experiences, coming to the recognition that love is at the root of it. I think that is really true, because loving consciousness, divine consciousness, is the basic fabric of the universe. It is from that everything else derives. And so what I came to realize, and I think for me this is the most revolutionary, well, no, it's the second most revolutionary understanding. I'll get to the first in a little bit, is I always used to think that we had the material world, and as most scientists do, and that the material world creates consciousness. That is, we have brains, and our brains create consciousness. What I learned from my experience with Christopher is that actually consciousness creates us, and love exists and connectivity exists. We are not the source of it. We have the ability to connect into it, to tap into it, to dial into it and become part of it. And by becoming part of it, we fulfill it. And that is our reason. That's our reason for being here.
Well, I tell you what, I've experienced times when I've, we talk about the two wolves inside. I admit sometimes I've fed the darker wolf, and it usually doesn't turn out well. So
listen, Chris showed me the dark wolf over and over again. I mean, it was as if he was confronting me, and I'm talking about when he was alive. He was confronting me with all my failings, all the things that I didn't want to recognize are part of me that I have. I mean, he was showing me how irrational and stupid and impatient I could be. And that was a gift. I mean, it was to be able to, because ultimately to be able to recognize that in yourself really helps you understand what
Well,
spiritual growth is about.
I'm sure that everyone watching the program has never fed the darker wolf, and they walk in perfect holiness
Oh, yeah.
and rapture, and they have a direct connection with God. And I'm sure they've already made a decision about this conversation. Hopefully, hopefully they have the unconditional love intention. Maybe some don't have the unconditional love intention. Maybe they'll take the opportunity to go negative. But all right, we got a couple questions here coming in for you. It says, um, well, this is a difficult question to ask. It says Chris became your guide of some sort. I mean, was he still your son?
Yeah, when I think back about the way Chris, of course, this happened after his death. So yeah, when I think about Christopher, I think about him as my son. I think about him as who he was in the flesh, and with tremendous affection. And I really, I the memories that I have of him, I love. We all do. We share them in the family. I still miss him decades later, but but I also realized that he was here to teach me, and to teach many of us that I'm kind of in awe of him, because in order to teach us, he really had to endure a very difficult life for 22 years.
I had a guest on the program one time that said that they were, I guess, in heaven of some sort, and they had a they before they were born. Now, biblically, there's a I think there's scripture that says before you were in the womb, I knew you, which indicates an eternal presence of an entity coming to earth and having a human experience. But the person said that I chose to be a certain father, was an alcoholic father, and he came down and then he had his son, and he died a horrible death. But during that time, his son came to be, let's see, he was living a lifestyle that wasn't full of love. It was a very destructive lifestyle, but his father's death turned him into this loving person where he committed the rest of his life. In other words, he said that he came down and chose to live that life that would be the life that would be the cog in his path to direct him to become, in other words, he sacrificed a life, say, coming down and being a great father and have lots of money and success. That this one, if he chose this one particular life, then his son would get from that, he would grow and become the son that is full of love and helping others. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Right. I mean, that is a real concrete example of the gift of the opposite. And it just operates all the time. I mean, I don't know if we actually make decisions about who we're going to be, or if it just happens that way. But what I would say in response to that, and from what Chris has told me, that yeah, you can't judge. In fact, at one point we were talking about everybody has a unique path, and when you follow that path, you know it. And but that we on earth can't really see who's following that unique path. We can't see who is expressing what they're supposed to express, because we're too misled by the illusions that we have. And from that, I would say, yeah, it's absolutely possible that someone could be a really damaged alcoholic and be teaching with love. Yes, I agree with that.
And I'm not saying I believe it. I just said there was a lot of possibilities. I'm putting that into possibility because I simply don't know, and I don't know anybody who does know about what's on the other side exactly. I mean, we have, obviously this happened to you, and your experiences are valid to you, and they should be respected, as all of our opinions are valid. Because let me tell you, when it comes to the other side, everybody could write a book. You know, I mean, so I mean, yours is just as valuable as everyone else's.
Right. I agree that there have been a lot of people who have had these experiences. In fact, when I talked about the appearance of Chris's spirit and kind of likened it to the concept of giving up the ghost, the fact that that notion exists is a reflection of the fact that for thousands of years people have been seeing spirits of the departed at the moment of their death.
Mm-hmm. You said
And
you said
yeah.
he was talking to you. Now, I'm not. You didn't really say what his condition was, but let's just. It was his condition while alive, where he couldn't verbalize correctly, but then
Well,
after
he
death he could.
well, he was a, well, for okay, so brain damage left him, first of all, very awkward physically.
Mm-hmm.
So he was always bumping into walls and doors and was full of scars. He communicated in very simple ways, but the things that he had to say were sometimes mind boggling. I'll just give you one example of a couple of examples. I mean, he would say things like, he came into the bedroom one morning, it was the crack of dawn, and he said, "I want you to get up." So he communicated pretty directly. I said, "No, Chris, I'm tired. I want to sleep some more. Go back to bed." And he said, "If you don't get up, I'm going to touch everything I see. I'm going to touch the phone, the money, the glass, and he would laugh when he said that because he knew what he was doing. At one point, he broke his brother's cuckoo clock, and his grandma, who had tremendous patience with him, said, "Christopher, you should be sorry. Say you're sorry for doing that." Chris said, "I'm not sorry, Grandma. I had to do that because it was a mistake." Now, that's a very kind of profound concept, really. Yeah, I have to make mistakes because I'm a human being. So why should I feel sorry for doing that? So that was the kind of insight and poetry that would come into his speech. We took him to see Dark Crystal, this Jim Henson movie, mm-hmm. with the Muppets in it, mm-hmm. and Chris loved the Muppets even up until the time he was 22. But this Dark Crystal is different. It's this very weird kind of adult fable in the guise of a children's movie. Mm-hmm. About 5 minutes into it, Chris stood up in the theater, said, "This is too crazy for me. Get me out of here." I mean, that's the way in which he communicated.
Somebody in the live chat said they've seen a number of deaths at age 22, and to them, it seems to be a little bit of synchronicity going on even here. So that's interesting to see what's going on with that. When he talked to you, how did he talk to you? Was it you verbally? Did you hear it in your mind, or how's that?
When the conversations I had with his spirit after his death were all in my mind, I was never in a trance. Mm-hmm. And so, like on one occasion, I was walking along a beach. It was a drizzly, cold, rainy day. I was walking my dog on the beach, who was on a leash because it was a puppy. And if rain happened to run down the back of my neck, I would feel it. And the conversation would end. And then when the cold chill from the rain went away, I'd return back to it. It was kind of like a reverie, but never like a trance, because I was always totally aware of my surroundings. And yeah, it was absolutely internal, directly to my mind.
All right, we have this question from the Fast Blast from Diva L. It says, Doctor, are you familiar with the work of Jane Roberts, author of Seth Material, especially Seth Speaks books? It covers human multidimensionality in concurrent times.
I'm not, but it sounds fascinating.
It sure does to me. I mean, what a title. Yeah. Okay. All right. Another person asked in a chat, how sure are you that was Chris?
Well, I've been asked that question before. At the time, I never doubted it, but as I reflect back on what I learned, I realized that and this comes into synchronicity, that Chris's teachings were principles he embodied in his life. And I just needed to really reflect and be fully present with who Chris was, to be able to recognize that everything that Chris was communicating to me as a spirit was in fact part of the way that he lived. This is who he was. And that's one of the reasons why I really believe that this was Chris that was communicating to me. Plus, at the time of his death, the spirit that I saw with Christopher's face was a being that was absolutely capable of sharing those kinds of revelations.
After your son's death, obviously, it sounds like you guys loved him very much. In that, did you have to have any kind of therapy as a result of that?
No, we didn't go for therapy. We did therapy with each other. That is, we talked about Chris. Mm-hmm. We reminisced. We told stories. Mm-hmm. We just remembered him, and that was the therapy.
And I take it you're married?
Yes, I'm married.
Okay. Did your wife hear any of this?
My wife saw she was there for the first two events, the balloon, and she saw his spirit at the moment of his death, mm-hmm. at the same time that I did. Mm-hmm. She did not enter into the same kind of conversations that I had with Chris when I was working on the book. But she did tell me that, and I don't remember the exact circumstances, Chris came to her at one point after his death and said, "Mommy, I was never," and he called her Mommy, I think. Actually, I'm not sure about that. Mm-hmm. "I was never in that chair. I was everywhere, all over the world." So he was reassuring her, certainly, about the fact that he was not limited by his disabilities.
Mm-hmm. So did you get the feeling that communication there, he was saying, I was there at different times, or I was everywhere at the same time?
It felt to me as if he was saying I was everywhere at the same time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was sitting in the chair, but I was everywhere all at once. And that is the way at one point, I asked him about his uncle, or his great uncle, mm-hmm. who had died when Chris was 15, and who had really loved Chris and had called him, his great uncle Jerry called him Charlie, and he used to say, "There's nothing wrong with my little Charlie. In fact, he's way ahead of all of us." Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, wow, is Jerry with Chris? And if Chris's spirit is like what I saw, mm-hmm. what does Jerry think about him now? So I asked Chris, I said, "Well, is Jerry there with you?" And he said, "Well, of course, where else would he be?" Mm-hmm. And then he said, "We're with God, and God is everywhere all at once. We're not local the way that human beings are."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to shoot another question out to the viewers in both chats. If you've had a loved one that's passed and you seen them, or they spoke to you in any way, or I know one particular person said that after their loved one's death, an object in the room was moved. So if anybody's had anything like that, an object moved, or any kind of indication that they were there or after death, or you saw them, just say yes, or keep it real short in either of the chats as we're going through here. I'd like to know. In the sort of the heaven that he was in, or the space that he was in, did he indicate there were other people there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He said everyone is here.
Okay.
That's what he loved about it. Everyone.
So that goes back to some duality here of being in two places at the same time.
Yeah, you could say that.
Is that possibly where dreams come from? That they come from another dimension?
I think a lot of phenomena may occur because of the intersection between that eternal present, that dimension,
Mm-hmm.
and this arrow of time dimension that we're living in,
Mm-hmm.
this material world. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of intersections that occur.
Mm-hmm. These intersections of space sometimes is described from guests on this program as thin places where two dimensions, and as a physical place where there is a place where the two dimensions are really close, and that from that space you may see a being come through there, and that would explain, say, why you wouldn't see it in another place because it's not sort of this thin place. Do you think perhaps that in the hospital room where your son was when you saw that was a thin place, and the power that his being was intersected with that moment of time at that space?
It may have been dependent on his being in the ER at Great Barrington Hospital. My feeling was that it was rather a manifestation of the power of his will and his decision to communicate this to us for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
because he wanted me to write this book already here.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. I see. I don't know, and whether intersections require a particular characteristic
Mm-hmm.
to the space, the material space that we're in,
Mm-hmm.
or whether they could happen under any circumstances if we just somehow separate from our attachment
Mm-hmm.
to time and matter.
Mm-hmm. Through all of this, have you come to any conclusions as to whether hell exists or not?
Well, actually, in the last conversation, at one point, Chris kind of joked about hell, but in the last conversation where we talked about evil, he said that there was no such place as hell. That, in fact, even the evil ones, we're all together, and they're there. And he said that, believe it or not, he said we all have perfect selves, and our job is not really, our spiritual task is not to perfect ourselves. We're not really capable of doing that. It was to unite with our perfect selves, to stop running away from our perfect selves. And what he said is that even the evil ones have perfect selves, believe it or not, or this may be hard to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And their torment is because they can never unite with their perfect selves because of their evil. And yeah, and I think, so my image is that, yeah, they're there with all of us, and they're tormented because they're not part of the party. They don't share in the joy. Yeah, so in a way, that's hell.
Yeah. So a person that's intrinsically evil, like say a Hitler or so, what's their part in the universe?
Um, I don't know whether they serve a purpose. Chris didn't get into that. Of course, the um, the difficulties that each of us confronts in life seems to be part of our spiritual growth. Um, and but as it was explained to me, it was more that because of the nature of love, they have to be allowed to exist, and they make this choice. We each make this choice, and so this happens. Maybe it isn't intended, but it's kind of part of the formula for creating the universe.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that God works in each individual's life to bring them to a place of love?
Oh, I think for sure that is that God attempts that. Yes, that God is there for that.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
but we ultimately there is free will.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher explained to me. So we either accept it or reject it.
How would we know if we reached, and I don't want to use the word higher plane or higher vibration, but a place of love that we maybe we're intended to get to, that God would be the best place of our life? How would we know that we have got to anywhere close to that?
Um, yeah, it's
Would we
how do you
be
take stock
would
of
we
that?
have sort of would we
That's
have
a
that
good.
unconditional love?
Um, I think it's by looking at our relationships with other people and trying to. First of all, I don't think any of us, certainly nobody that. I mean, I don't think any of us can really get all the way in life. I mean, there's just too many obstacles to it. There are too many things that hang us up. Um, and so there is always some separation from our perfect selves. And, as people have said, we are intended to be imperfect. We are perfectly imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
But I think by taking stock of our relationships with others and the way we treat others,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the closest, to me, that is the best way to understand where you are.
Mm-hmm. Is there any individual alive now that you know of or heard about or read about that exemplifies at least somewhere near the kind of love that we hopefully will get to?
Well, I've certainly read about individuals, and including, of course, it's always hard to know whether what you're reading
Mm-hmm.
is tells the whole story. But individuals like Mother Teresa,
Mm-hmm.
who approached her work from the perspective of spreading God's love. And she's been criticized because she wasn't trying to make things better, but that does reflect a kind of higher understanding of what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. So it seems that an indicator would be some sort of self-sacrificing life in some way.
Well, I don't really see it as being self-sacrifice, because what when you really love in a selfless way, you are actually fulfilling your highest purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice from the perspective from the kind of warped perspective that that most of us live
Mm-hmm.
in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really think it's a sacrifice at all. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's really a fulfillment.
What do you think about the statement that all the laws and all the commandments are summed up in these two? That you should love your neighbor as yourself, and you should love the Lord with all your heart.
Yeah, I would go with that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
And I mean, a lot of people they like to have rules, and one of the rules is you have to believe like they do. In most cases, I notice if as I look through my Facebook feed and other feeds, and if you veer off from what they believe, then you've fallen off some deep dark crevice where there's no hope for you ever. I don't know if you ever, if you know what I'm talking
Sure, there are a
about.
lot of people like that. I mean, um, I've run into them in different settings most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because in medicine, I've been kind of a maverick in many ways. I found people who bring that perspective to their professional work. Most of them kind of fall by the wayside. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that people who are bound by that kind of rigidity usually wind up
Mm-hmm.
being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and since the publication of Already Here, which was just a month ago, I've had a few communications from people who are so locked into a rigid way of understanding the world that they find it hard to accept
Mm-hmm.
the message that I'm trying to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is. That's part of the diversity of experience.
Mm-hmm.
But that does actually lead me to what my main goal for people who are reading Already Here or considering it. It's not really. I mean, there's a lot of material in this rather small book, and a lot of big ideas. And I mean, it mostly all comes from Christopher and my attempt to explain what I learned from him. But the main purpose of the book is not to promote the ideas that I learned from Christopher, because other people may come to different conclusions. It's my recognition that there are many Christophers in the world. I mean, he said he's just like everyone else. There are so many people, and each of us has Christophers in our lives, people who are impaired or disabled or in pain, people that we would like to ignore because they're difficult or they're challenged or challenging. And we can learn so much from them if we open our hearts and minds to them. And the methods that Christopher shared with me and that and that came out of my encounters with him, I hope that they can help people identify the Christophers in their own lives. I call them the hidden teachers of the spirit. Mm-hmm. And you will find, and through them you'll find your own truth. Mm-hmm. It may not be the same truth mm-hmm. that I've found. Chances are it'll have a lot in common, because when you really look, as you said, when you look at all the people who have had really deep spiritual experiences and near-death experiences, two things that are common to all of those stories are light and love. And so chances are you will find things that overlap with what I've been talking about, mm-hmm. but it doesn't have to be the same.
Right. Well, I don't think the lesson you described is an evil one. I would consider that a universal wisdom right there. Is that there are there's the old country songs of God bless the broken road that led me to you. And so you say, well, I wish I had a smooth road in life, but if it leads you to a certain place, and certainly what's happened to you has led you to a certain place, and everybody's road is different. And I've learned not to judge and be so critical on this program, and I get criticized for being not so critical and judgmental. So, hey, you know how many times I've had people email me and say, well, that guest is going to go to hell, and this guest here is summoning demons, and on and on and on. Everybody, demon behind every book, behind every statement. I mean, it's like, come on, man. Is there anybody out there that doesn't have a demon or something? I don't know. It's like a default mechanism. People can't listen to each other. They hear something and their teaching or their rigid belief system kicks in and throws up a flag, and then all of a sudden they're attacking. And when they're attacking, I'm not sensing the love. I'm thinking, wait a minute. You have arrived because you have the truth. Then why am I sensing attacking a person for different beliefs than you? I wouldn't see that from a person who has arrived to the place of love through their awesome understanding of everything, because they hold the keys to the truth. Because when I find somebody like that, then I will know that by one, they would have unconditional love, and they wouldn't maybe not have to say a thing. I would know it. But if they do speak, then it would confirm what I already know, that they have unconditional love. And so that's why I hold back from that. That kind of attack when somebody has a completely different story than what I've ever heard. Hey, we've got another question for you, and this comes in. It says, "Where do you think the soul goes after death?"
Well, it's not a place. It's not as if there is a place that's like here we are in Earth, and then there's a destination that's separate. It's there is. And as Christopher said, like space is an illusion, place is an illusion. There is a state of being that that is where the soul is at all times, before and after death. That is, there really isn't a before and after. There is this place. There is God. There is this state, God's moment, that is a celebration of beingness and love, and we are all there. While we're, to the extent that we are involved in this material world, we're kind of distracted from it. We're separated from it. We don't see it most of the time. We don't feel it. But we need to be here because this is what allows us to exist as individuals, which the love that that connects us as individuals requires that kind of separation. I don't know a better way to explain it. I do try to explain it and use Christopher's words in Already Here.
Well, I'll tell you what, Doctor. I know I certainly haven't arrived because I'm continually, when I have a thought or an action, and then minutes later I think, "What did I say that?" or "What did I think that?" You know, and usually it's usually it's in the judgmental area, and I'm frustrated. But you know, I felt like, okay, all right, at least I was aware. I mean, that's the first
Right,
step,
yeah.
man. At least I was aware.
Have those thoughts is great.
You know, so
And
I'm measuring. I'm measuring myself all the time, and I'm thinking, okay, why are you thinking this way? You know, this, and usually it's not love. You know, it's something else, and a lot of times it's selfishness and you know, judgment in there. And I'm always trying to hack that down, man. And it seems like it's a battle and a fight. I want that good wolf.
But what Christopher might say to you is what he said to me: lighten up. You know, that is, yeah, it's great that is who you are. Someone who is always evaluating himself, channeling, trying to be a better person. But don't condemn yourself. I mean, love the bumps in the road and accept your imperfections. In fact, the tool that Christopher used to teach people while he was alive were his imperfections. That was his most common tool. So if you treat somebody in a way that you decide isn't fair, I think you can have regrets about that, but also understand that you just created a bump for that person that maybe is going to help that person grow spiritually. It's like the alcoholic father. You are playing a role. This is not all about you being perfect. You, in your imperfection, are playing a role in the teaching of other people through your imperfection, through your mistakes, through the problems you create.
All right. Well, hopefully I'm making a lot of people better off.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Whew. Now, see, I disappointed a whole lot of people because they thought the Cosmic Cowboy was perfect, man. I think I just disappointed some people. But hey, even the bad sounds like it's going to be all right, man. And you know, what's wrong with that message? That it's okay? That you're struggling, that these struggles you have is okay?
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, I think that I recognizing the struggle, and I mean, isn't that what Jesus taught? I mean, you know, the people that he went to the most were the sinners.
Yeah. And yeah, he said, I didn't come here for the whole people. He said, I came here for the sick.
Right.
The downtrodden and the people that lived, you know, the drunkards even, you know, so, you know, why do you, you know, they question, why are you over there with the drunkards, you know, and then the harlots and yeah. That's a good message.
Right. That is such an important message that often gets lost by people who get into this holier than thou frame of mind.
Which is prevalent, and of course the internet has empowered people to believe, to delude themselves that they have arrived at perfection in knowledge, and I think they better hold on a little bit because I'm just not sure that anybody's really got there yet. That's why I'm not so judgmental or quick to judge, and because you know, hey, until I become perfect, then I can't expect perfection from anyone else.
Right, and maybe maybe that's not even the purpose, to be perfect in life. Maybe perfection is accepting your own imperfection and being able to love yourself nonetheless, and that then allows you to love other people through their imperfections. I mean, I think that's what Christopher was trying to help me understand.
So would you say all in all then that we are definitely here for a reason?
Oh yeah.
That our
we are
birth
here
and our
to
life
manifest divine love. That is the reason. It is the only reason.
All right. Well, Doctor, we come kind of near the end of the broadcast here. If there's any topic we didn't cover or anything you'd like to say in the final moments, you go right ahead.
Listen, I think this was a great conversation. I really appreciate the questions that you asked, that the listeners asked. I think I've said most of what I want to say. And if I haven't covered everything, it's because there's been so much that we've gone into.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to believe that somebody heard something that they would find useful. Certainly, I have. Doctor, I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. Dr. Leo Galland, can we have you on again sometime?
Sure, I'd love to do it anytime.
All right, sir. Thank you for coming on the program. We'll have you back.
Great.